to a steering rack and pinion. Now we're working on an 05 Mercury Mariner. Be the same thing as a Ford Escape or a Mazda Tribute. As you can see, this one's leaking out of that outer seal. It's been leaking pretty bad. That's why we're changing this one. Take the outer tie rod off. There's a little keeper that keeps the lines in. You have to take that off. Got a little number 10 bolt on it. Take that keeper off and then the lines will pop out. Let the fluid drain out. Try and protect those little O-rings that are on the end of it. Now we got to get the steering knuckle loose. Now if you look up there, that's the threaded side of the bolt that holds the steering knuckle. We got to get to the head side, so what we're going to do is actually turn the steering wheel to where the head of that bolt is this way, take the bolt out, then turn the steering wheel back and lock it in place before we pull it out. As is usually the case, one of the hardest things on this job is getting the steering knuckle loose from the rack and pinion steering unit. It's really tight up there, and it's hard for us to get our tools up there, let alone camera and a light. So we'll just have to explain that. Use a T45 Torx socket and an extension, and you'll need someone else probably to help you by holding the boot up, the rubber boot up with like a long pry bar or something like that. You'll probably see that that bolt is not facing down where you need to get to. So go up on top, turn the steering wheel until that bolt is facing down, then take the bolt out, and then when you're done, go back up on top, straighten the steering wheel and lock it in place before you take anything else off. You can get yourself a little bit more room by loosening the subframe bolts, one on each side. And then there's another one on each side up here. They're pretty tight. Take a pry bar and a socket, pry it down a little bit. That'll keep it in place. By doing this, you're going to drop the subframe a little bit, not a lot. You're going to give yourself a little bit more room, but it's also going to help that steering shaft come out of the collar on the rack up there. Makes it easier to get that in and out. Now we're going to hold this boot up with the pry bar so that you can see it. Okay. Now you can see by doing it this way, it actually helps that steering rack come out of the collar on the steering shaft. Then you take loose the bolts that are holding the steering rack to the subframe. There's one on each side. There's a little brass bracket on this power steering line. It's got a little number 10 nut on it, and that's holding that down to the rack. You got to take that loose so that the line will stay up. There's a bracket on the other power steering line too. Both of them are holding those lines down to the rack, so take both of them off. Now at this point the rack should be free from being held down, and you just need to work it through, kind of twist it and turn it and get it out the driver's side. Okay, as always is the case, you need to match your parts up. We always like to take the old one and line it up right with the new one. Make sure everything's the same. And you'll notice the new one comes with a new set of O-rings to go around your lines when you put them back on. The new rack usually comes with O-rings for the tubes, so change your O-rings where the power steering lines go into the rack. Another important item is to make sure that the steering shaft is in the same position. So what we do is look at the old one here and see how it's lined up, and then go to the new one and take channel locks or something and just rotate that until they're in the same position as close as possible. Now you have to take the outer tie rod end off, loosen that adjusting nut, count how many threads, and then unthread the outer tie rod end. It's going to have an alignment anyway, but this is just going to make it much easier to get it close. Take off the adjusting nut. Now you thread this adjusting nut back on. You're never going to get it perfect, but if you count the threads and thread it right back to the same amount of threads that are exposed, you're going to be a little bit close, and it should make it easier to align it when we need to do that. Then you simply thread the outer tie rod on. Now if the outer tie rod were bad, this would be the time to replace it. Put that tie rod in the same position, pointing down. And then tighten up the adjusting nut. Then you do the same thing on this side. Now you just take the new steering rack, put it back in the same way the other one came out. Now you do have to kind of twist and turn it and fiddle it around in there to get it in place. Once you get it in place, get all your bolts in and just start it before you tighten anything down. At this point, it's just time to start putting everything back together. Tighten your lights down, the brackets, all of your subframe bolts. One of the last things you have to do is put the steering knuckle onto the steering rack. There's really no easy way to do this. It's not comfortable, it's not fun. The only thing we can tell you is it's better if you have someone work with you and can hold up that rubber protector boot, get it up high enough out of the way so then you can get your bolt into the connector. And then just like always, double check all your bolts and things, make sure everything's tight. Let it down, put power steering fluid in it, exercise it back and forth until you get all the air bubbles out, and you should be done.